हमारा रेडियो इन सोलन हिमाचल प्रदेश and Rukmini is leading this panel. You all know Rukmini. She's now working on the peer review process with the ministry. She'll tell you more about it shortly. I'd just like to use some moderator privileges to just introduce this idea of evaluation, peer review in the context of community radio in the country, and then we move on to Rukmini's presentation. 10 years after the first license has been issued, 10 years since the first radio station was up, we have now started a new journey where we are urging stations to hold a mirror to themselves, to examine their own practices in a self-evaluation and in a peer review process. It's a very important step and indicates to some extent the maturity of the sector of which all of you are a part. Many of you who belong to NGOs and others, even institutions, are very used to evaluation frameworks. Right? There are always funding agencies, donor agencies talking about evaluation. There's been a lot of rethink about evaluation frameworks in the last decade or so, where people are now suggesting that any communication for development initiative, including community radio kind of projects, should consider the participation of people on the ground in all processes and stages of the work they do, which many of you are already doing, from production to post-production work, transmission, broadcasting, and it's time that people running these radio stations are also capacitated to evaluate themselves, to become researchers. That's the next big step. From what I have seen of the process and the various toolkits that are in the basket for the communities to use, there is a high level of emphasis on processes, on principles, and on values such as inclusion, communication with your community, mutual trust, continuous learning, yeah? And less emphasis on achieving specific measurable results or outcomes. Yeah? It's, as far as I can tell, it's not measuring, yeah, this process. And when you see that measuring kind of process coming from outsiders often, with donor agencies and others coming in, there are very often very unrealistic demands, unrealistic targets and time frames, and impact assessment that's demanded often of the communities, with many donors expecting to see measurable results in an unreasonably short time frame, and most likely determined through certain preset measurable indicators, yeah, over which the community has no say. And this can lead to creation of results that may have some meaning for donors, but often has very little meaning for the communities. So I think this process that has been initiated with various organizations working on it, the ministry taking a lead in initiating this process, is going to work very differently, has already started working very differently. Yeah? This is meant to be an ongoing learning and improvement process. Yeah? No matter how well all of you are doing, no matter how many prizes you have won at the Sammelan, I'm sure everybody can think that they can improve further, wherever they are. Yeah? And this review process is supposed to aid you in that, in deciding where you think there are deficiencies, where you think you can pat yourself on the back and say we have done quite well in the last 2 years, 3 years, and we need to improve on certain indicators, on certain parameters that community can determine on itself. Yeah? So this is a shift, as some of us have been saying at the UNESCO chair, it is a shift from having to measure and prove to understanding and improving. Yeah? this is not about measuring and proving to anybody, but this is about understanding your own work and see how you can improve it. So I'll stop there with those initial comments, and this is an exciting process which has just started. I request now Rukmini Vemaraju to give us an introduction to what this process is about, explain the methodology a bit, and then stations will explain the review process of which they have been a part. Rukmini?
Thank you, Vinod. Very good morning to all of you. And thank you for setting up the boundary conditions so well that so we know the framework that in which we are going to be operating. For the last 2-3 days, you've been hearing about peer review in various contexts, starting from a separate allocation for it, even in the fund that the ministry has approved. So you know that it is a top priority thing at this time, as in it is really time for stations to look at where we are and where we want to go and how do we want to do it, and what can we learn from everybody else who is taking this journey with us. I hope peer review has been kept as a peer review. I don't know Hindi or multilingual as I might be accused of being, but I don't know a word peer for. So I request the translators for now to just keep it at peer review so that we are all on the same page. So I have a few a short presentation, and I will try to take you through all the thinking that has gone into it. Yeah, maybe that might be. Yeah. 10 minutes. Yeah, good. 10 minutes. So let me begin by thanking the ministry for actually actioning this in such a quick time. The process of how the peer review should be itself has been very, very epileptic and very consultative. All the stakeholders have been part of this process. And to begin with, we can, if we might, for want of a better word, if we might call it the pilot phase. We started in the MIB presentation. You saw that there were 40 stations. Yes, the idea was to get roughly 1/4, 25% of the operating stations. But at the end, we ended up with about 31. So, of which I think 30 people are here because I've been chasing them for the last 2 days. One station is not represented. So I thank all of them for being part of it. And I also thank the remaining 10 of the 40 who were not able to be part of this, because when you say a process is voluntary and then you call 40 and all 40 participate, you begin wondering if it was really voluntary. So it's nice that some of you have, for whatever reasons, short notice, no tickets, busy with your own CR engagement, for whatever reasons were not part of it. But I would just like to quickly take you through the process of how the 40 were selected, because I have been flooded with these questions that why didn't you call us? So they were very, very simple, humble criteria. One was, we thought, let's start with the older stations first, because if you just started a year ago, you know, probably you're not ready for so much manthan and reflection yet. So we said at least 3 years, and that's what the toolkits also, we noticed, said that people had to be there for at least 3 years to be able to participate in a reflective process. So that was one criteria, and we tried to give some geographic representation, include stations from different parts of the country, and finally, to the extent possible, to include both NGO and campus stations. Although the policy, of course, does not discriminate separate one from the other. They all operate under the same policy and same licensing conditions. But nevertheless, we thought, since the things that govern these radios and NGOs and institutions might be somewhat different, so here was an opportunity to get everybody on board and see, how do we all develop a common understanding of what we should be doing. So that was the process of selection and or identification. So a letter went out to an invitation from MIB to about 45 stations, and eventually 31 were able to participate and join us in that. The first peer review orientation workshop was held here in Delhi from February 17th to 19th, and where we discussed in detail what is this whole process about and how shall we get there. So this is a quick background on, so I'll take you through the main aspects of what, why and how peer review. What happens? Page down doesn't do it. Okay. Oh. Okay. And you would think PowerPoint is the easiest of technologies to operate? Apparently not. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, and sorry for being all thumbs. Okay, like Vinod has said, and like all the toolkits have also been saying, peer review is being looked at as a co-learning opportunity. It's an opportunity for people to learn from each other. You share your successes, you look at your strengths, you discuss your challenges, you discuss your limitations. And as Vinod has already said, it's not an external evaluation, and it is not a comparative ranking. Mera safedi tumhari safedi se kyun zyada hai. It's not that. We are not going there at all. But more importantly, it is not an attempt to forge a consensus of any kind. This is not to say if and only if you are doing this and this and this, then you are good and otherwise you are not. It's not an attempt at that. So I hope I have rested those fears about whether it's an evaluation or how will this be used. This will only be used by you for doing what you are doing better, by seeing how others who are doing it, who are supposed to be doing the same thing, are doing it. It sounds a very complicated sentence, but basically it's just that, nothing more. So to improve one's service, because we've all undertaken to do something for the communities that we live in or work in. It's a positive reinforcement for working well. I'd like to give a quick example. Yesterday, one of the participants in this, he came and told me that he was trying to look at a certain toolkit, and he felt very daunted by the infrastructure template